for the UK, brand is critically important. What features do your customers want, and how do you produce those? I think we want to be the high quality, high reliability supplier that backs up the brand values of UK. What we need to do is to figure out where in the supply chain, what's a value add, who's got the best skill set and the best experience and the best IP to add that value, and how we're all going to collaborate together better. Good morning, everybody, and thank you to the AESIN management for inviting me to have a talk this morning. Greenhill Software is a software company, so I will be taking that view and trying to describe some of the issues and potential solutions that we're seeing in the automotive software market. Unlike Dave Nesbitt, Greenhills isn't a well-known company, so I want to spend a couple of minutes describing what we do, not as a product pitch or anything, but to give you some insight about what we see and where we're coming from when we're talking about automotive systems. So Greenhills is a supplier of software development tools. Every car company in the world is using our compilers in some way, but also in real-time operating systems, in safety systems, and in software device drivers. So we're engaged at the fundamental platform level, which is, I wanted to explain that because when you talk about AI and cloud connectivity and application space, that's not where we're seeing the world from. We're seeing it from the functional safety. This code has to work. How does your software connect to the semiconductors in your ECUs in the cars? So I was given some questions to discuss. So that the questions I'll be looking at is, well, what about the complexity? Because you can't indefinitely increase the complexity of your vehicles, because otherwise your time to market gets infinitely long as well. The second one is something else that Dave alluded to. There are a lot of companies, a lot of people who haven't been involved in automotive, who are now saying, oh, I want a bit of that because it's a very big and important part of the world economy. And a company that's maxed out on semiconductors for cell phones will be looking around, well, what other multi-billion-dollar-a-year markets are there I should be in, and go, I can do something in automotive. And then what questions should we the people here who are UK based, who want to see UK PLC be successful, what questions should we be asking? So the first one, complexity. Complexity was not reduced, and there are some parts of your complexity that are very easy to measure, and kilometers of wire in the car is a really easy one. You're from 8 kilometers to 5 kilometers to 1 kilometer. You've reduced a hardware complexity. But what we're actually doing is replacing the complexity in the hardware with a complexity in the software. And as a supply chain, and Greenhills is usually a tier 2 supplier in the automotive supply chain, everybody has to play their part in saying, this is how we can reduce the complexity in all of the systems and not just in the wires. Wires are great, but so one of the things that we're going to have to do, and people have been looking at us for decades, is collaboration on the non-differentiating parts. And has that worked? Not sure. The OSEC and then AUTOSAR groups, bodies were supposed to commoditize big chunks of the software in the car, so you could switch suppliers and get that last cent out of the price, which is what the purchasing people want. But what they've actually done, and this is happening to all regulations, like, oh, we can regulate this, and we can add that, and we can add this. And so what you're getting is solutions that are again, building a complexity for the sake of it. Another one, reliability has not been improved. You know, the recalls in cars are not because the OEMs want recalls. They are because the job they're trying to do is so complex and so difficult that you can't always get it right first time. But if you look at the dollar values, and again, this is not UK centric, this is normally US centric because they recall for everything. The car companies there are spending billions per year recalling cars. One of the US OEMs told me that the bill they had was 2.1 million for recalls. I thought, okay. The 2.1 million was for sending out the letters to recall the cars. So the postage bill was 2.1 million. I proposed connected cars and they could email it, but and there we go. So, so for us, and you know, again taking a UK-centric view, where is the sustainable value creation? You know, we all hear stories of companies like BYD building factories the size of Leicester, or you know, chip companies like Qualcomm wanting to invest $100 billion in semiconductors and software for the automotive supply chain. And in the UK, we don't have those war chests of money to say, we're going to build a bigger factory than they've got, or we're going to invest more in a semiconductor than they can. So what we have to do is we have to pick our battles, and we have to figure out what we're really good at. And the UK is really good at brand. You know, they're some of the best known and most stable brands in the whole world come from the UK. And certainly JLR has at least two of them. But you know, we have Aston Martin, we have Rolls-Royce, we have Bentley. You know, you never say that a Rolls-Royce is the Rolex of cars, but you would say a Rolex is the Rolls-Royce of watches. You know, we in the UK, we've got brands that not only match the best, they are the brands that people pick. So what can we do from an electronics, a software, a perspective that will increase, enhance, and make these brands last? And you know, and how are we, the people in this room, going to support that? We've seen some supply chain changes in the last few years. You know, 15 years ago when I took over my role, and I know I'm a sales manager, but I've got more technical people than salespeople, so I kind of you know, try and add some value as well. We were very much a tier 2 supplier. The OEM would say, I want a box that does this. The tier 1 would provide that box, and they would come to tools companies, operating system companies, middleware companies, and different applications. They would assemble that box and go, here you are. And the OEMs would often have to live with whatever's in that box, which was very much a black box solution. But the switch, and there have been pretty horrific switches for the automotive industry in the last decade. There have been a lot of regulations around the powertrain, you know, whether it goes full electric, whether it's hybrid, whether it's you know, zero emissions, and there are multiple alternatives to what zero emissions can mean. You know, whether it becomes a hydrogen fuel cell, or whether it's internal combustion with a sustainable fuel, or whether it's battery electric. They're all different, and that's really thrown the OEMs off a cliff. You know, again, a decade ago, Bentley said, our biggest value is our beautiful engine. It's like, well, when it's all electric, that you have to create a different value. And the other big one is the regulations around safety systems, because You know, we had seat belts, we had anti-skid brakes, we've had these, but now everything from a driver monitoring system that warns you if you're going to fall asleep, which could be really useful if you're a truck driver, and really irrelevant if you're a mum taking their kids to school, because there's no way you're falling asleep. And all of these regulations are all piling in as well. So a lot of the OEMs went, oh, software is a value, we're going to bring everything in-house. And we've had some, spectacular statements. Stellantis, I'm going to employ 20,000 software engineers. Personally, I just about get by managing 20, and again, credit to anyone who manages more than that. And obviously bringing everything in-house was a defensive move against the value going away from the OEMs. And again, the semiconductor companies really want a big share of the value of the vehicle, which isn't what the automotive companies want. They want the value to stay with them. So that hasn't been the right answer either. And what we need to do is to figure out where in the supply chain, what's a value add, who's got the best skill set and the best experience and the best IP to add that value, and how we're all going to collaborate together better. How do you create 10,000 man years of IP? We've got 10,000 man years of IP in an operating system that's a few thousand lines of source code. Various people are going, oh, we're going to invent our own, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. Well, why would you? And certainly there are other challenges coming up. The Cyber Resilience Act doesn't apply to cars, but the automotive companies are looking very closely at it. And the Cyber Resilience Act says, if there's a cyber issue with your product, you have to notify your consumer within 48 hours, and you have to fix it within a very short time period. And the automotive industry is on a slightly different track, but we know that this is going to come and hit all of us as well. So going, oh, I'm going to have open source code, when you've got to maintain it for 5 or 10 or 20 years after you ship the product, that then becomes a massive cost burden. And we've seen this with safety in the past. You had to design it all in at the start. You can't just think about it at the end. And now cyber resilience is another thing you can't just think about at the end. And a decade ago, when the cars weren't connected, you didn't have to worry quite so much, but now everything is connected, and there are people with very deep pockets who like the idea of cyber attacking masses of vehicles, not just one, but I can think of various people around the world that would love to be able to bring to a halt every vehicle in the UK today, or certainly in other countries, and certainly for other political and economic reasons. So these are the issues that we're seeing from our kind of lowly position in the supply chain, and it's affecting how our customers are interacting with us, and how they're interacting with the whole ecosystem around the automotive supply chain. So again, building a software product, you really have to focus on the architecture. And so often I see in my engagements with, particularly with the tier ones, they go, okay, we've got to make a box that does this. We're going to start working and we're going to prototype with all the free software, and we're just going to bolt it all together. And then once we've got it all running, then we'll look at the safety case, or we'll look at the security case. And what generally happens is they get halfway through the project, think, oh, we're nearly there, and then realize that they're going to be shipping a year late because they hadn't considered all of the integration issues and all of the safety issues and all of the security issues. So my beg of our customer base is really sort your architecture at the beginning and plan in your time, and plan in your resources, and plan in your suppliers, so that you don't end up with this scramble at the end trying to debug or plug holes in your security offering. back to what I was saying earlier, creating a competitive advantage. And I think that for the UK, brand is critically important. What features do your customers want, and how do you produce those? And certainly in the UK, I don't think we want to be the low-cost supplier. I think we want to be the high-quality, high-reliability supplier that backs up the brand values of UK. There will always be a Chinese car that you can make cheaper, and I won't say nastier, but that's not where we are. So we have to really focus, and we have to really make sure that the whole supply chain is backing the brands. And again, then, what are the differentiators for the brands? Is homemade software always a differentiator, or is it sometimes a differentiator, or is it because a software engineering manager finds it easier to do it all himself than to talk to someone in another country or another company? So we have to be a lot cleverer about when to use things outside, when to use things inside, and also where the engineers are. And credit to anyone who's managing teams of software engineers scattered across the world, because even your software build, I've come across a case where we'll deliver a software platform, and we'll find that half of the engineers at our customer are actually using the previous generation to develop their code on, because the communication hasn't gone past. So actually, no, you're using version 19 of the operating system, not version 17. And it's very, very hard to manage your CI/CD platforms, your automated builds, your making everything work, your validations. And that's something that I would recommend everybody looks at very carefully. And the other thing is supply chain. The critical conversation with the purchasing manager is, okay, you want the price to come down. How can you, how do you push for the lowest price without destroying all the value from your supplier? And there's an interesting balance, because it's easy to get 10% out of the price and 20% out of the value of what your supplier is offering you. I won't say we see train wreck with a picture of some broken cars, but we find that a lot of our customers are find it very difficult to specify what they want from us. Oh, please do supply an operating system running on this processor. Oh, include a file system and Ethernet and a whole load of device drivers, please. And we do that. 6 months later, well, my boot time's too slow and the network's crashed and it's not all working the way I wanted it to. Well, it works the way you specified it. Now, and they go, oh, well, I'd like to change the specification, please. And then you end up with a whole load of rework, both for us as a supplier and for the customer and for all of the other people in the ecosystem who are adding application code in. So really tightening down the specifications, again, before you start work, of I want this hardware to do this, and I want to have this connectivity and this boot time and this memory module, and oh, I'm changing memory chip halfway through. Well, that one had a built-in wear leveling and the new one doesn't. Ah, but it's 1 cent cheaper. And you can feel the issues. So again, spend more time at the beginning of the project and less time at the end of the project. And I did get, I'm assigning blame to all 16 of my software suppliers, and we portioned it out, so it's 5% to them and 8% to them, and it's like, well, yeah. So, for me, what to develop in-house versus what to purchase. IC vendors are supplying software, then in an as-is format. Somebody needs to harden that for shipment in millions of vehicles. Don't just start coding, add enough resources to architect everything really well at the beginning. And one thing we find, interestingly, is that internally, when we're writing software, when it's fully functional, we say it's 50% of the way there. So the second half is then performance tuning it, integrating it, documenting it, writing the tests, getting it running through all the validation suites on multiple boards. So for every time, oh, it's working, right, you're 50% there. And that's kind of the rule of thumb that we've got internally for QM code. The other rule of thumb is any ASIL certified code is 5 times the effort compared with QM code because of the additional testing, the number of people you need to sort out the program management, to sort out the software design, the documentation, the test. You have different people writing the test compared with the person who wrote the code, so they can't keep the same systematic error. So people say, well, why is ASIL code so expensive? Because it takes 5 times the effort. So I'm about out of time, and this is the interesting one for me. You know, some people prefer to be the passenger in the car, and some people prefer to be the driver. And I think it's the same in the supply chain. Sometimes if you're relying on somebody else in the supply chain, you feel like a passenger. You don't feel in control. But sometimes that's not such a bad thing, and other times you absolutely have to be the driver. So that was my my thoughts. So happy to take a question or two. I think I've got 1 minute left. Do questions at the end. Okay, in which case, thank you very much for your attention. Hope you found it interesting.